Fox Sports News' Luke Doherty joins me now. We'll get into all that in a moment, Luke, but a bit of breaking news out of the Aussie camp as well.
Yeah, reports in News Corp press just appearing about 10 minutes ago that the Aussie skipper Pat Cummins is actually going to be heading home for personal reasons to deal with a personal matter, but there is 10 days between now and the start of the third test in indoor. So Pat's actually going to make his way back to India after coming home for a few days. No other details surrounding that situation as yet, but it does seem that Pat Cummins will be coming home according to these reports, before then returning to India for the third test.
All right, so that's the breaking news out of the Aussie camp. What's not new to people is Australian teams in India. Look, it just strikes me, no tour match. Our test stars were in the BBL instead, and yeah, it boosted the BBL comp. But if we want to seriously win in India, we can't do that. We've got to take our players over, get them used to conditions. And it's not just the batsmen. Obviously, that helps them getting used to it, but it's having a bowling attack with, say, 3 spinners and 1 quick or 2 quicks. They need to get used to it too.
Yeah, it just seems a bit of a mishmash at the moment. And like the World Cricket calendar, there's more cricket than there actually is space to play it. And that has impacted on preparations for this tour. So you mentioned they didn't want to go over and play any tour matches. The justification is that they weren't in control of any of the conditions that get served up for them. That they might, instead of raging turning pitches, they get served up with green tops. They don't resemble anything compared to what they're going to face. So what they did, they went to North Sydney Oval and they got the groundsman there to prepare a couple of pitches that would more closely resemble the pitches that they were going to face on this Indian tour. They thought they had it right as best as possible. You mentioned the Big Bash there as well. To remember the clamour around having our test stars available for the Big Bash, it was the conversation of the entire summer. The only problem with that is the Big Bash clashed with the start of this test series. So you couldn't have your cake and eat it too in regards to the Big Bash. It also hampered preparations in terms of scheduling tour matches. So that's part of the reason why they found themselves in this situation. You mentioned the 3 spinner option there as well. They had Ashton Agar over there as their left arm spinner. He doesn't play a test. Suddenly Matt Kuhneman is on his way over and playing. Mitch Swepson goes home for the birth of his first child. Then he goes back to India for the third test. It just seems like too many balls in the air at the moment, and now they're starting to drop all over the ground.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good point around the green decks they prepared before. Darren Lehman pointed out they'd done I think it was Dubai, the camp they had there, which at least mimics those conditions. Because the other thing that strikes me is we keep getting in the first test, we were in competitive positions. In this test, we were on top. You'd rather have been Australia when the day started, and a few hours later we'd lost. And it's concentration. I think that's got to be partly down to just that heat and conditions. And the longer you're in it, once a couple of wickets fall, we just can't solidify, and nothing more sort of totemic than that huge swipe from Pat Cummins. I know he's not a batsman, but after the drinks break, when people thought, well, at least we get to take a breath here, and he tried to hit it for 8.
He didn't. He's not a batsman, you're right, but he is the captain and has to lead with example. And Pat can bat. He's not just one of the world's best bowlers. He's actually a pretty decent batsman. For the skipper to go out there and play a shot like that in that situation, I thought spoke volumes of just where their heads are at in this Australian team. The highest partnership that we've been able to put together, Australia's batters, in the whole of the Test series was 82, and that was in the first innings of the first Test, and that was between Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne. Outside of that, there's been second innings capitulations, one for under 100 and one for just over. You mentioned there, they were oh so settled in this first innings as well after 2 days of absorbing cricket, but when the wickets come, they come in clumps and they can't seem to stop the rot, and the panic sets in. That leads to the scenes that we saw last night.
Yeah, the extent, the premeditated shots compared to Indian batsmen, which sort of wait for the bad balls, is what struck me. Despite all this, somehow we're still likely to get to the World Test Championship, because Sri Lanka would have to win both tests in New Zealand. We'd have to lose both ours. Now, the latter thing could certainly happen, but we could almost be favourites. I mean, it'd be at the Oval. We might have a fit Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark steaming in. So it'd be a bit of a weird sight, wouldn't it, if we started sort of favourites after maybe getting a shellacking against India.
Yeah, it might be some revenge, that's for sure, in terms of if we get whitewashed in this series 4-0, but New Zealand ends up doing us a favour and doesn't lose 2-0, so we qualify for the World Test Championship final. India there as well. And you've got to remember, after that series comes the all-important Ashes, where we haven't won an Ashes series in England since 2001. We've drawn a series there to retain the Ashes, but we haven't actually gone over and won one since 2001. So this is the biggest 12-month period in Australian cricket for some time, taking in this series, the World Test Championship final and the Ashes to come. And at the moment, their confidence is absolutely shattered. As you mentioned there, it looks like they're batting on the face of the moon instead of batting on a pitch where proper technique, proper temperament might see them through some tough periods.
Yeah, and I think it's 6 days after that World Test, the Ashes begins. So we can multitask by then. Luke, great to get your thoughts.